The wind had the scent of old wood smoke, sharp and dry, long before Min saw the ruins. She was no longer Min, not really. In the mouths of others, she was just that girl. The one who didn't scream when the bakery caught fire, the one who survived only because no one thought she was worth saving, the one whose face had burned on one side, turning what was once quietly pretty into something people avoided looking at. She didn't have a voice anymore, not the kind people listened to, not since her father sold her silence to the trading post. She can still keep a fire going, he'd muttered, handing her over like surplus grain, can still clean a floor or warm a bed. Useless in a mirror, maybe, but she's not dead. That was comfort in the world she came from. Not kindness, not peace, but the comfort of knowing your place, even when that place was beneath someone's boot. The trader hadn't even looked at her as he led the mule west. He called her girl or cargo. Didn't ask if she could walk, didn't ask if the bandages still bled. When she stumbled, he tugged the rope tied loosely to her wrist. When she whispered for water, he ignored it. She learned not to ask. At night, she slept curled beside the fire, not for warmth, but because she feared the cold more than the heat now. Fire had shape. Cold was endless. It lived in the pit of her ribs where hunger used to be, and it hollowed her out just the same. On the third day, they reached a ridge overlooking a field of ash, what was once a cabin maybe. 2 horses waited near the tree line. One of the men there dismounted when he saw them, tall and still, with dark braids and eyes that didn't move quickly, didn't flicker like they were looking for flaw. She braced herself for another transaction. Instead, the trader threw a look toward the man and spat. "Yours now." And he was gone. No coin passed hands. No names exchanged. Just a handoff like a broken lantern. Useless maybe, but capable of light once. She didn't move, didn't cry, didn't lift her head when the new man, Lakota by his braids, by his quiet, approached. He didn't touch her, didn't speak, just crouched, slowly, his knees creaking in the earth, and set down a water skin and a folded cloth beside her. Then he sat beside her, not above, not looming. Minutes passed. She waited for the demand. It never came. She dared to glance at him from under her soot-crusted lashes. He looked ahead, not at her, like someone who knew the weight of silence, who didn't fear it, who had lived with it so long that it had become a language. "Don't look," she whispered, her voice like cracked glass. He didn't. Instead, he poured water into the cloth, warm and clean-smelling, and reached for her foot, not with force, but with reverence, like he was washing something sacred, something not his. Something still whole, even if broken. Her breath caught. No one had touched her without wanting something in return. No one had knelt without cruelty. And in that moment, for the first time since the fire, she felt seen. Not because he asked her name, but because he didn't ask for anything else. The next morning, Min didn't wake so much as return to her body. Sleep had not come easily. Her skin ached from old burns and new bruises. Her mind curled around nightmares like they were familiar blankets. Fire, her father's voice, the silence of people who looked at her, and then quickly away, the kind of silence that wasn't mercy, but disgust. But outside the tent, the world had moved forward. Voices in a language she didn't know floated through the air like birdsong, low, melodic, steady. A dog barked once, then settled. Someone was grinding corn. Someone else was singing off key. It was peaceful. She wasn't used to that. The man who had washed her feet the night before, he was already awake, crouching beside the fire, hands moving with slow confidence as he stirred something in a blackened pot. His name, someone had whispered nearby, was soon. She hadn't spoken his name yet. It felt too large in her mouth. But he'd spoken to her once before. Sunrise. "You don't have to cover your face with me," he'd said. Simple words. No pity in them. No claim either. She hadn't known how to answer, so she didn't. But something in her chest had shifted. A door cracked, not open, but not locked anymore. Now, as she sat wrapped in a wool blanket, her hands still stiff with tension, she watched him offer a bowl of food, not to her directly, but to the ground beside her, letting her choose whether to reach for it. That was new. She had never been given a choice without a price attached. She took it, hands shaking. It was just stew, roots and grains and a hint of wild onion. but it felt like something sacred, like trust given shape. Still, even in this quiet, even surrounded by strangers who didn't stare or whisper, she couldn't shake the question echoing inside her. What am I now? Not a daughter, not a wife, not a servant or a transaction, just a girl with burns and no voice, left behind by everyone who should have stayed. She needed something. She just didn't know what it was yet. Later that day, Soon handed her a simple cloak. Nothing fancy, just stitched hide, warm and worn, but he draped it over her shoulders with the kind of care that made her want to cry. He didn't tell her what to do with it, just nodded once and walked toward the mule, tying a bundle of herbs to its saddle. When she didn't move, he looked back, not impatient, just waiting. Her legs hurt, her feet burned inside the makeshift wrappings. But still, she stood, and he smiled. Not with his mouth, just a small shift at the corners of his eyes. A signal. You're not broken. They walked together in silence, past rows of low-built huts and cooking pits, past elders weaving, children playing with sticks, women laughing with their hands in flour, and no one pointed, no one whispered. That was need too, this feeling blooming in her chest like panic but softer, the need to belong, the need to speak her name without shame, the need to wake up and not wonder whether she was a burden. She didn't speak much during those first few days in the village. Her voice cracked when she tried. Her mouth wasn't used to forming words again. But someone gave her a wooden figure, a small bird carved from driftwood, and she kept it in her pocket, running her thumb across its wings whenever the silence grew too loud. Soon never asked her to speak. But when they sat by the river one evening and she finally whispered, "Why are you kind to me?" he answered with no hesitation, "Because someone should have been long ago." And then, softer, "Because you didn't scream." That stayed with her, not as a compliment, not as a judgment, as recognition. He'd seen her for what she wasn't able to do and honored it anyway. That night she dreamed of fire again, but this time it didn't swallow her. It surrounded her like a circle, and in the middle of it, she stood untouched, wearing the shoes she hadn't dared to ask for, saying a name she hadn't spoken in weeks. Men. When she awoke, the name still echoed in her chest. Not men, the name of a girl sold and silenced, but men, the woman she might become. The bundle felt too light in her hands to mean something so heavy. 2 soft leather shoes, plain, undecorated, newly stitched, sat wrapped in simple cloth on her lap. They weren't beautiful, not by any town girl standards. No gold beads, no embroidery, no ribbons, just thick thread and careful lines. But to men, they looked like freedom. She hadn't worn shoes since the fire, not because she didn't want to, but because no one thought she needed them. Burned feet weren't worth covering. She was a girl meant to serve, not to walk with pride. And yet, here they were, given by the elder of the village, wrapped and placed in her lap, not with ceremony, but reverence. When she looked up in confusion, Soon had crouched beside her as he always did, low to the ground, voice quiet. The elder asked what your price was. He'd said, I told him there was none, only respect. Then he'd motioned to the shoes. These are the first you choose for yourself. If you wear them, you stay. If not, we go back. No shame in either. Men stared at them now, heart pounding in her ears. Her fingers shook as they hovered over the edge of the leather. The bandages on her feet were stiff with dried salve and ash. Her toes were twisted from heat, her soles scarred smooth in places, blistered in others. She wasn't sure they would fit. She wasn't sure she deserved to try, but then she heard it, soft and certain, a child's laughter nearby. Luda, the girl who had touched her cheek without flinching, who had said something in Lakota that felt like the word beautiful, even if men couldn't quite translate it. That child had looked at her and not seen ruin. She had seen someone worth sitting beside. Men slowly unwrapped her feet. The pain was sharp, but not unfamiliar. She eased one foot, then the other into the leather shoes. They didn't fit perfectly. They rubbed against her burns. Her heel stung, but they fit enough, and that was new. That was powerful. She stood. The entire courtyard fell silent, not from awe, not from spectacle, from respect. And when Soon saw her rise in those shoes, he didn't smile wide or say anything proud. He just nodded, a simple motion that said, I see you now, as you see yourself." She stepped forward, unsure, each movement pulling at wounds both physical and unseen, but her back stayed straight, her shoulders didn't hunch, and no one reached to steady her. They made space. That night, she didn't sleep in the edge of camp shelter anymore. A woven mat had been laid out for her in one of the cedar lodges, beside herbs strung from the ceiling, and a small fire kept low in the hearth. There were no locks, no guards, just welcome. She lay on her side, shoes placed carefully beside the mat, the wooden bird still cradled in her hands. For the first time in months, she wasn't afraid to close her eyes, because if she woke up in the same place, it would be by choice. At dawn, the drum called her. It wasn't loud, just a slow, rhythmic pulse from the village center, like a heartbeat pressed into earth. She stepped outside, barefoot, letting the new shoes rest for now. The air was cool, the ground damp with early dew, but she didn't flinch from the cold. Across the circle, she saw him, soon, kneeling in front of a small fire, bare-chested, head bowed, palms against the ground like a man in prayer. The scar along his temple caught the flame's light, casting strange shadows across his face. She approached without speaking. He didn't look startled when he noticed her, as if he'd known she would come. "You heard the drum?" he said. She nodded. "I didn't know if I was allowed." He met her eyes. "It called for you." The words didn't make sense, at least not in the way rules usually did, but she felt their truth. He gestured for her to sit across from him, the fire between them flickering softly. Then, with no preamble, he asked, "What did they say about me in the towns?" She hesitated, but he didn't ask cruelly, just curiously, like a man examining a wound already known. So she told him. "They said you don't speak, that your silence is dangerous, that you bought land with blood." He nodded, unsurprised. "They said I was cursed," she whispered, more to the flames than to him. "That anyone who touched me would carry the fire too." He looked up at her fully. "They were wrong, about both of us." The words landed heavy, not just comfort, correction. She swallowed. "Why me? Why bring me here?" "Because you didn't scream," he said again. "You didn't beg. You stayed quiet while everything burned. That's not weakness. That's survival." Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. "And because," he added, "I looked at you and didn't see the fire. I saw what was left standing after it." She reached forward, hand trembling, and pressed it into the dirt between them. A quiet offering. When he placed his hand over hers, neither flinched, and in that moment, scar to scar, silence to silence, she crossed over, not into a new place, but into herself. Men rose with the village now. She no longer waited for someone to tell her where to go or what to do. She listened, she watched, she chose. Some mornings she helped grind corn beside the elder women. Her hands, still stiff with scar tissue, moved slower than theirs, but they never corrected her, only nodded when she found the rhythm. Other days she followed the hunters, gathering roots and herbs near the tree line. Soon, often walked beside her, but never in front. His presence was quiet, like the thrum beneath the drumbeat, steady, unseen, but always there. Each moment was a trial, not grand, not loud, but personal, sacred. The first time she stirred a cooking pot in front of others, her hand shook so violently the spoon clattered against the rim. No one laughed. Luda, sitting beside her, gently placed a smaller ladle in her palm. Men took it with a nod, her throat too tight for thanks. That afternoon, an older woman showed her how to braid herbs for drying. Men tried once, then twice. The third time, her braid held. Imperfect, but hers. The woman smiled. "You remember," she said softly in accented English. "Your hands do." Men blinked back tears, because she had known how to braid, long ago, before the fire, before her father sold her for quiet. Each day she recovered something lost, not in bursts, but in inches. Her voice, still raspy, began to return. She practiced words at night when no one could hear. Sun, river, woman, name. She whispered them into the clay walls of her lodge like incantations. Then, one morning, Luta burst into her lodge uninvited, holding a carved wooden rabbit. The girl spoke quickly in Lakota. Men didn't understand every word, but she understood the intent. She accepted the rabbit with both hands and managed a single word in return. "Thank you." The girl lit up. "Wika," she replied, pointing at men. "Woman." Men repeated it, her voice cracking. "Wika." Her first word spoken to someone, not just into silence. It was more than progress. It was power, but trials never stopped coming. One morning, hoofbeats shattered the calm. Dust rose from the edge of the village as a group of riders appeared. 3 men, town clothing, clean boots, polished spurs. Men's heart dropped before her mind caught up. One of the men, taller, with slicked back hair and a sneer etched into his face, dismounted and shouted, "I'm looking for Men Greer, my wife." The name hit her like cold water. The man, Clem, looked exactly as he had on the day he tossed her into the trade, bitter, sweating, puffed up with ownership. Men froze, her knees locked. Luda clutched her hand. "You okay?" the child whispered. Men couldn't answer. Soon stepped forward, axe in hand, not raised, just resting. "No one is owned here," he said calmly. Clem scoffed. "Who are you, her savior? You buy her too?" Soon didn't answer. He turned to men. "Do you want him here?" It was the first time anyone had ever asked her that. She could barely breathe. "No," she whispered. "Then say it," Soon said. "Say it where he can hear." Her mouth went dry. Every instinct screamed to disappear, but instead she took a breath so deep it shook her chest, and she stepped forward. "You paid for silence," she said, voice breaking but clear. "For shame, but you never saw me." Clem spat. "You'll regret this. No one else would have taken you." Men stood taller, her shoes pressed firm into the earth. "I'd rather be seen as whole by strangers than kept as broken by someone who called himself family." The village was silent. Soon stepped forward, not menacing, just present. "I didn't take her," he said. "I stayed. That's different." Clem glared, but he left. And men didn't fall. That night, she didn't flinch from the firelight. She sat beside it, shoes beside her bedroll, rabbit on her lap, Luda curled under her arm. Her scars hadn't vanished. Her voice still trembled, but she had stood, not because someone made her, because she chose to. Later, outside the lodge, she sat beside Soon in the dark. He sharpened a blade. She held a bowl of water, washing herbs with careful hands. "She told me about your brother," she said softly. "He didn't look up. He pulled me out. I lived because he didn't." Men didn't speak right away. She didn't reach for his hand. She didn't try to fix it. She just said, "Thank you." He raised an eyebrow. "For what?" "For not trying to fix me," she said, "for just staying." He gave a small twitch of a smile, barely there. "You didn't need fixing, just time, and space, and shoes." That made her laugh. A real one. Later that night, she placed her hand over her chest and whispered her name into the quiet. Men. Not in shame, not to hide, but to own it. She had faced her past. She had not run. And now the road forward was hers to walk. Scarred, yes, but hers. The village was quiet the morning the sheriff came. He rode hard into the glade with dust in his wake and papers in his hands. His badge gleamed under the rising sun, and his voice carried authority born of towns and men who believed in signatures over stories. "I need Men Greer," he said, dismounting. "There's a claim against her." The word settled like frost. Men was kneeling by the corn rows with Luda, her hands covered in soil, her back warm from the gentle sun. When Soon approached, she already knew. "Someone's come," he said gently. "From the town. Says there's a debt. Or a man." She wiped her hands on her skirt. Her heart didn't race like before. It clenched tightly, but it didn't run. "What do I have to do?" she asked. "Face him," Soon said, "but only if you choose to." They walked together to the fire circle where the sheriff stood, explaining to the elders. "She's still legally married to Mr. Clem Greer," he said. "He filed for a return of property. I'm enforcing the writ." Men stepped forward. "I'm not property," she said. Her voice was clearer now, firmer. The sheriff blinked, unused to resistance. Ma'am, I'm just carrying out the law. He says you ran off during a transaction. Men felt the old shame flicker at the edge of her ribs. I was sold, she said evenly, and I walked away. That's different. One of the elders stood. Her eyes were sharp as flint. This village does not answer to town law, she said. This woman has been named one of us. The sheriff scratched his head. Ceremony or not, it won't hold in court. Only way out is to come back to town, sign an annulment, or the claim stands. A hush fell. Soon stood beside her, steady. Luda clung to her shawl. You don't have to be afraid, the child whispered. Men straightened her back. I'm not. Then she turned to the sheriff. I'll come with you, she said, surprising them all. Soon turned. You don't have to. I want to, she said. I want to walk into that place and end it myself. Not hide, not be dragged. I want them to see me stand. The elder nodded once. Then we go together. They arrived in town the next morning, the same town where she had once been traded like flour and flourished like a ghost. But this time, men rode tall. Her hair was braided the Lakota way. Her dress was simple but clean. Her scars were uncovered. She wore the shoes they had given her like armor. People stared. They always did. But now they didn't see a broken girl. They saw someone who chose to return. At the courthouse steps, she waited until the sheriff returned with Clem. He came swaggering, smirk already forming, until he saw the crowd behind her. Soon, the elder, two Lakota men standing like stone, Luda holding the wooden rabbit. What, changed your mind? Clem sneered. Decided to crawl back? Men stepped forward. No, she said, I changed. You didn't. She took the document from the sheriff, scanned the text, and signed at the bottom. Not as Men Greer, but simply men. Then, without blinking, she walked to the ceremonial brazier burning by the square and dropped the paper into the flames. The writ curled, blackened, and disappeared into ash. There's your property, she said. Ash and wind. The crowd didn't cheer, but they didn't look away either, and men had never stood straighter. That night, as they returned to the village, the sun dipped low and the air turned gold. Men didn't dismount immediately. She sat tall on the horse's back, the wind sweeping through her shawl, the quiet like a blessing. Soon waited at the edge of the glade. When she reached him, she slipped down and walked the last steps herself. It's done, she said softly. He called me by my old name. I didn't answer. Soon studied her. What name do you answer to now? She paused, then smiled, real and whole. The one no man gave me, the one the fire didn't take, the one you heard when I couldn't say it aloud. He stepped forward, brushing a wind-tangled lock from her face, not avoiding her scar, not emphasizing it. Just seeing, say it, he whispered. She took a breath that filled her lungs fully. Men, I'm men. And he bowed his head, not to submit, but to honor her. Then men, he said, is a name I will speak with reverence all my life. They stood in silence as the village lit their fires around them. The world didn't change, but she had, because she had returned to the place that once took everything and claimed nothing back but herself. The days after her return felt both softer and heavier. Men no longer moved like she might vanish. She walked with bare feet in the grass behind her lodge, let the wind run through her hair, no longer hiding the way it curled unevenly near the burns. Her name, once a whisper, once something spat at her, now lived freely on the tongues of others. Children shouted it while chasing feathers. Women said it with nods of respect. Elders folded it gently into stories told by firelight. Still, healing had its price. One evening, while stoking the fire in her lodge, she burned herself again, a small flame. Nothing like before, but the pain bloomed fast, and so did the memory. She dropped the stick and recoiled, heart racing, breath shallow. The fire didn't hurt as much as the memory of it. She sat there in the silence, shaking. Soon found her that way. He didn't speak, just crouched beside her and reached for the cloth she always kept nearby. She tried to stop him. I can do it, I know, he said gently. But you don't have to. Her throat tightened. I hate that it still scares me. That even now, he looked at her steady. You lived through a thing that should have ended you. Of course it still echoes. She pressed her palm against her chest. I thought when I burned the paper, when I spoke in town, I thought I'd be free of it. You are, he said, but being free doesn't mean it stops hurting. She closed her eyes. She had taken back her name. She had stood in front of her past, but she hadn't escaped it, not really. And now, the price of that freedom was learning to live with what still remained. Later that night, Luda curled beside her in the lodge, warm and half asleep. The child had started sleeping there without asking. Men didn't mind. It felt right somehow, like the ache in her heart had carved a space perfect for someone else's laughter. Soon says fire can be medicine, Luda murmured into the blanket. Men looked at her. And did he say that to you? The girl nodded solemnly. He said it about himself. His brother died in the fire that gave him the scar, but he lived, and he changed. The air between them thickened, not with pain but understanding. Men whispered, "Me too." At the river's edge the next morning, men knelt and washed her hands. The water was cold, clear, and slow-moving. She remembered the first time Soon had washed her feet here, the first time someone had touched her without demand. She dipped her arms deeper, letting the chill bite. It wasn't cleansing, it was remembering. Soon appeared beside her, stepping softly, as he always did. She didn't look at him at first, just let her fingers move through the current. "You spoke well in town?" he said. "I didn't know I could," she replied. "You didn't have to speak," he said. "You just had to believe someone would listen." She turned to him. "I think I'm ready," she said. "For what?" "To be called wife," she answered quietly. "But only if it means I'm still me." His response came without pause. "It only means you'll be honored as you are." She looked down, water dripping from her fingers, heart beating like a slow drum in her chest. "That's all I ever wanted," she said. They didn't wed with trumpets or bells. There was no altar, no vows carved in stone, just a clearing in the woods, braids of wildflowers, and the hum of a drum too old to belong to one person. The village gathered not as audience, but as witness. Men stood barefoot in the moss, her dress simple, her scars uncovered. There were no apologies in her gaze, no fear, just truth. Soon stood opposite her, hair tied back, ceremonial beads at his wrist, his eyes steady. He held nothing. No gift, no symbol, only presence. Luda stepped between them and said in her clearest voice, "You don't have to say words, just look." And they did. Men stepped forward until her feet touched his. The forest hushed, the world steadied. Then Soon knelt, not to claim her, but to honor her. He took a bowl of water, and just as he had done so long ago, washed her foot with slow, reverent care. When he finished, he looked up at her and said, "Not because you need fixing, but because you are sacred." She knelt too, placing her hand over his heart. "Then let me wash yours someday." His mouth twitched with the ghost of a smile. "You already have." The elder woman stepped forward then, placing 2 small clay beads in men's palm, one blackened with ash, one swirled with sunrise red. 2 fires, the elder said, one that destroyed, one that remade. Men threaded them onto her necklace, the same one Soon had gifted her in her 3rd week here. That night, they sat side by the river, their knees touching. Men leaned her head on his shoulder. "Do I belong to you now?" she asked. Soon shook his head. "No, we belong beside each other. That's stronger." She closed her eyes. It wasn't about ownership. It never had been. It was about choosing to stay and knowing that staying costs something. Her scars still ached, her voice still caught, but her name now bloomed on others' lips like sage at sunrise. And that was the price she paid for healing, to keep walking forward, even when the fire still flickered behind her. The morning mist clung to the village like a veil. Men stood outside her lodge, arms wrapped around herself, listening to the soft rhythm of the cooking pots being stirred, of laughter beginning to rise like steam. The woven shawl draped across her shoulders had been a gift from the elder women, stitched with firebirds in red and gold, wings outspread. She didn't hide anymore. Not her feet, not her voice, not her name. The clay beads at her neck tapped softly together as she moved. Ash and sunrise, the story of her body worn close to her heart. She made her way to the central fire where others were already gathered. Children darted between adults. Luda ran to her with a painted bowl in her hands and a bright grin. "Can you help me stir today?" the girl asked. Men smiled. "Only if you teach me a new word." Luda giggled. "Okay, wiyaka. It means feather." They knelt together, and Men let her fingers wrap around the ladle, stirring the stew while Luda leaned into her side. Others joined them, weaving herbs, mending baskets, and singing low melodies that were part lullaby, part prayer. This had once felt like another world, something beyond her reach. Now it was simply home. She wasn't just allowed here. She was named here. One of the older women passed by and patted Men's shoulder. "You speak softer than most," she said, "but every word lands true." Men looked down, her throat thick. "I'm still learning." "We all are," the woman replied. "That's the work of staying alive." Later that day, she returned to the river alone, the place where Soon had first knelt, where her silence had been honored, where something in her had started to live again. She rolled up her sleeves and began carving a small figure from driftwood. Her hand still trembled slightly, the burns on her wrist tightening when she gripped too hard, but she didn't mind. She was shaping something, a woman standing upright, both hands held out, not to beg, not to offer, just to exist. When she finished, she placed the figure on a rock near the water and sat beside it. "You stood too," she whispered to the carved shape, "so I wouldn't forget how." Soon appeared a few minutes later, holding a pouch of dried berries. He sat down beside her, not saying a word, just sharing the quiet. After a while, she spoke. "Do you think I'm done healing?" He looked at the figure, then at her. "I think healing's not a road with an end," he said. "It's a place you return to, again and again. Some days it welcomes you, some days it refuses your voice, but you go anyway." She exhaled. "Some days I still feel like I'll break again." "Then break," he said gently, "and rebuild. You've done it before." She looked at him, eyes glistening, and reached for his hand. "You helped me remember who I was." "I didn't give it to you," he replied. "You brought it with you. Buried, maybe, but not gone." That night, the village gathered for the seasonal circle, a meeting of fire and voice where every person, no matter their age, had a place. It wasn't a ceremony in the way townspeople thought. There were no robes, no preachers, no steps to memorize, just truth. Men stood at the edge, watching the elders settle in, their faces lit with flickering gold. Her pulse quickened, soon caught her eye from across the fire, and nodded once, not urging, not calling, just believing. She stepped into the center of the circle. The silence that followed was not heavy. It was sacred. "My name is Men," she began, her voice steady but low. "I was given away, burned, silenced, told I was a burden." Her eyes swept the circle. She saw children listening wide-eyed, women pausing in their stitching, men looking at her, not in pity, but attention. "But here," she continued, "here I was reminded that I am not my scars, that surviving doesn't make me less, it makes me chosen." She looked at the elder woman seated opposite her. "I learned I can choose who sees me, who touches me, who stays." She turned toward Soon then, who remained seated, as always, grounded. "And I've learned that love does not raise its voice. It kneels, it listens, and it waits." The air pulsed with quiet approval, no applause, no cries, just the sound of hearts recognizing truth. The elder woman stood and stepped forward. She draped a woven sash across Men's shoulders, one only given to those who had spoken from the center of pain without asking for rescue. "You are not a guest here," the elder said. "You are one of us." Men bowed her head, and Luta, beaming, wrapped her arms around Men's waist. That evening back in her lodge, Men placed her driftwood carving beside the rabbit Luta had once given her. She stared at them both. One was survival, the other, rebirth. Then she whispered, not to the fire, not to the wind, just to herself. "You came back. You stayed." The lodge flickered with soft light. Outside, Soon sat sharpening a blade again, and inside, Men braided her hair with red thread, not because she needed to, but because she wanted to be seen, not as perfect, but as present. The first frost came quietly, blanketing the village in a thin silver veil. Men rose early that morning, wrapped in her shawl, and stepped outside her lodge. The ground sparkled faintly beneath her bare feet, but she didn't flinch. She welcomed the cold like an old memory, sharp, humbling, honest. Behind her, the fire still glowed low in the hearth. Beside it, Luda still slept soundly, curled into a ball beneath two thick blankets, clutching the wooden rabbit men had carved for her as a gift. That small carving had taken her 3 evenings. The hands that once trembled now moved with certainty. The girl, who once hid her face, now left the lodge door open at night to hear the wind. She had changed, not all at once, not neatly, but completely, and not into someone new, but into someone true. Later that morning, men sat by the communal fire with other women, braiding herbs, mending seams, preparing for the season's end. One of the young wives leaned over and whispered, "My husband asked if I'd braid his hair like you braid Soon's. He said it holds better." Men smiled, surprised. "It's the cedar oil," she said, "and patience." Another woman added, "My daughter asked if she could go without a veil next moon. She said, 'Men doesn't cover her scar. Why should I cover my own?'" Men's hands paused in the braid. Something inside her swelled. Not pride exactly, but recognition. Her name had become more than a sound. It had become a signal, a kind of quiet permission for others to be more themselves. That evening, as the sun dipped into gold, Soon waited for her near the river. He did not call her. He never had. But she went, drawn not by duty, but by the rhythm they had come to share, the pull of presence, the hum of silence. He sat on a stone, cleaning the blade of a carved bone knife. She joined him, placing a small basket of fresh berries between them. "I dreamed of the fire again last night," she said quietly. "But this time, I didn't burn." He looked at her, his eyes soft. "What happened?" "I walked through it," she replied, "and I carried someone." "Who?" She paused. "Myself." Soon nodded, like he already knew. She turned to him. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we'd never met?" He answered without looking away. "You'd still be you. Maybe not here, maybe not yet, but you'd find your name again." Men felt her throat tighten. She reached into her pouch and pulled out the 2 beads, ash and sunrise, and pressed them into his hand. "I want you to keep these," she said, "not because I want to forget, but because you remind me I'm more than what I lost." Soon closed his fist around the beads. Then he reached forward and unwrapped the final bandage she still sometimes wore, the one around her left hand, the worst scar. He held it gently in the last light and said, "This hand shaped a new life. That makes it sacred." She didn't cry. She simply placed her palm over his chest and whispered, "Then let me give it fully." The season shifted slowly. Frost gave way to snow, snow to melt, melt to green shoots, and men remained. She planted herbs with the elder women. She taught Luda how to shape dough with one hand. She carved figures of women standing, children reaching, warriors kneeling, not in defeat, but in reverence. And the village began to say things like, "When a girl speaks her name aloud, they say she's walking the path of men. When a scar is left uncovered, they say men would be proud. When someone survives the unthinkable and stays kind, they say that is men's way." Her name became a seed, and it bloomed in the mouths of others. One morning, Luda asked, "What does your name mean?" Men stirred the pot by the fire and answered softly, "It means the one who stayed, the one who rose." Luda blinked. "I want a name like that." "You'll grow into it." Men smiled. "You already are." Near the edge of spring, a girl arrived from another village. She had no shoes, no voice. Her eyes were hollow, and her arms clung to herself like armor. The people gave her bread, a cloak, a place to rest. But they didn't ask for her story. They just waited, and it was men who approached her first, not with questions, not with medicine, but with a bowl of warm water and a folded cloth. She knelt before her, just as someone had once knelt before her, and without saying a word, she dipped the cloth and reached for the girl's foot. The girl flinched, tears forming. Men didn't press. She simply whispered, "You don't have to cover your face with me." And the girl let her. That night, men stood in her lodge doorway, firelight behind her, wind at her back. Soon came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist. "You're quiet tonight," he said. "I'm remembering." "What?" "That I used to think survival was the end of the story. And now," she turned in his arms, "now I know survival is only the beginning of becoming." He touched her scar without fear, and she let him. Not because she had nothing left to hide, but because she had everything left to live for. Please like, share, and subscribe to support more true-hearted stories on Oldic Wild West stories. If you had seen him kneel to wash her scarred feet, would you have watched or stepped closer? Tell us in the comments.